Picture this. A young woman stands at her palace window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She wears a crown that weighs more than just metal and jewels. It carries the weight of centuries, the burden of bloodlines, and the cruel promise that power and wealth cannot shield the heart from breaking. This is not the beginning of a fairy tale. This is the beginning of a tragedy that has played out countless times throughout history, in castles from France to Norway, from England to ancient Carthage. Today, we're going to walk together through the corridors of time, following the footsteps of princesses whose stories Hollywood forgot to tell. These are the women who had everything the world could offer, yet lost everything that truly mattered. Their stories are not just about crowns and kingdoms. They're about the universal human experiences of love, loss, betrayal, and the desperate search for meaning in a world that seems determined to break your spirit. But before we step into these shadows of the past, I want to ask you to join our growing family here. If these stories touch your heart the way they've touched mine, please take a moment to subscribe and let me know in the comments which of these tragic tales moves you most. Your thoughts and connections to these stories matter deeply to me. They're what make this journey through history feel like a conversation between friends rather than a lecture from a dusty textbook. Our first story takes us to 15th century France, where autumn rain patters against the windows of the Hôtel Saint-Paul, just outside Paris. It's October 27th, 1401, and in the quiet hours before dawn, a baby girl takes her first breath. Her name is Catherine de Valois, and she's born into a world already cracking at its foundations. Her father, Charles VI, should be celebrating the birth of his daughter, but instead he's lost somewhere in the labyrinth of his own mind, battling demons that no physician can name or cure. Catherine's earliest memories are not of lullabies and gentle embraces, but of hushed conversations behind closed doors, of servants whispering about the king's latest episode, of a mother who carries herself like a ghost through the palace halls. This is the world that shapes her, a world where even royal blood cannot guarantee safety, where madness lurks in the corridors of power, and where a little girl learns far too early that love and loyalty are luxuries that political necessity rarely allows. As Catherine grows, France bleeds around her. The 100 Years' War has been devouring lives and hope for over half a century, and the country staggers under the weight of its own suffering. Yet even in this chaos, there's a strange beauty to Catherine's childhood. Stolen moments of joy in convent gardens where she receives her education. Quiet afternoons with religious texts that offer her glimpses of a world beyond the one that imprisons her. Fine clothes and toys that remind her she's precious to someone, even if that someone is absent more often than present. Then, like a storm sweeping in from across the Channel, comes Henry V of England. Young, ambitious, and freshly crowned at 26, he wins a crushing victory at Agincourt in 1415, and suddenly, Catherine's fate is no longer her own. She becomes a chess piece in a game far larger than herself. A beautiful young woman whose worth is measured not in her intelligence or kindness, but in her potential to bear sons who might unite two warring kingdoms. The marriage negotiations that follow feel like watching someone else's life unfold. Catherine is discussed, evaluated, promised, and delivered like a particularly valuable piece of cargo. On June 2, 1420, she stands at Troyes Cathedral speaking wedding vows to a man she barely knows in a language that still feels foreign on her tongue. She is 20 years old, beautiful by all accounts, and completely powerless to choose her own destiny. England welcomes its new queen with pageantry and ceremony, but Catherine quickly learns that being queen consort means being perpetually on display while remaining essentially invisible. She's crowned at Westminster Abbey in February 1421, surrounded by strangers who see her as their king's prize rather than as a person worthy of knowing. 9 months later, she gives birth to the son everyone has been waiting for, little Henry, who carries the hopes of 2 nations in his tiny fists. But fairy tales don't exist in the real world, and Catherine's story takes its first devastating turn when her husband dies of dysentery while campaigning in France. She's not yet 21,
and suddenly she's a widow with an infant son who has just become King of England. Custom dictates that a queen dowager should never remarry. It's too politically dangerous, too threatening to the established order. Catherine is expected to spend the rest of her life in dignified solitude, watching her son grow up while she withers away in the margins of his story. For 6 years, Catherine plays the role expected of her. She's the dutiful mother, the respectable widow, the ornamental figure who appears at state functions and then disappears back into her quarters. But Catherine has inherited something from her mother that no one anticipated, a stubborn streak of independence that refuses to be crushed by convention. In 1428, she does the unthinkable. She falls in love with Owen Tudor, a Welsh nobleman with kind eyes and a gentle manner who treats her like a woman rather than a political symbol. Their marriage causes a scandal that reverberates through the English court. Parliament threatens to strip Owen of his lands and wealth, but Catherine doesn't care. For the first time in her adult life, she's chosen something for herself, and the joy of that choice sustains her through all the angry whispers and political machinations that follow.
Their marriage brings Catherine 4 children in quick succession, 3 boys and a daughter, who represent not just her personal happiness, but her active rebellion against a world that tried to tell her that her desires didn't matter. 2 of these sons, Edmund and Jasper, will go on to play crucial roles in English history, with Edmund becoming the father of Henry Tudor, who will claim the English throne as Henry VII and found the Tudor dynasty. Catherine never lives to see her youngest children grow up, never witnesses the impact her small act of rebellion will have on English history. In January 1437, at just 35 years old, she dies after a difficult pregnancy, leaving behind a husband who will soon be imprisoned for daring to marry above his station, and children who will have to navigate a world that sees them as living reminders of their mother's defiance. But death, it turns out, is only the beginning of Catherine's ordeal. The English nobles, still angry about her second marriage, decide that a woman who dishonored her royal husband doesn't deserve to rest beside him. Instead, they bury her in the Lady Chapel at Westminster while placing a wooden effigy next to Henry V in the royal tomb. It's a final insult, a way of erasing her, even in death. For nearly 3 centuries, Catherine's coffin lies in various locations around Westminster Abbey, forgotten and disturbed by construction projects. Visitors become curious about the damaged coffin with its visible remains, and in one of history's most bizarre moments, Samuel Pepys writes in his famous diary about visiting Catherine's tomb in 1669 and actually kissing the lips of the mummified queen. "I did kiss a queen," he writes, with a mixture of wonder and macabre satisfaction. It's not until 1878, 441 years after her death, that Catherine is finally laid to rest beside Henry V. The wooden effigy that replaced her is now displayed in Westminster Abbey's museum, a strange monument to the centuries of indignity that followed her death. From Catherine's France, we travel north to 13th century Norway, where Bergen's harbor gleams under the midnight sun. Here, around 1234, another princess enters the world, Christina, daughter of King Haakon IV, one of the most powerful rulers in medieval Europe. Christina grows up in a court that stretches its influence across the North Sea, controlling territories from the Hebrides to Iceland, but her childhood is shadowed by civil war and the constant threat of violence that comes with disputed succession. Unlike Catherine, Christina grows up knowing she's valuable in the marriage market. Her father's position as a dominant force in Northern European politics makes her a prize that kings across the continent desire. But Christina's story becomes a cautionary tale about the gap between promise and reality, between the glittering prospects of royal marriage and the harsh truths that await even the most carefully negotiated unions. The marriage proposal that changes Christina's life comes from Alfonso X of Castile. Known as Alfonso the Wise, he rules much of the Iberian Peninsula and dreams of launching crusades against the Moors of North Africa. But he needs ships,
specifically the Norwegian fleet that dominates the North Atlantic. A marriage between Alfonso and Christina would secure this alliance, bringing together two of Europe's most powerful kingdoms. In 1257, Christina sets out on what should be the adventure of a lifetime. At 23, she's tall, golden-haired, and striking, everything a medieval king could want in a wife. Her journey south through Europe is like a royal progress, with nobles competing to show her honor as she passes through their territories. The closer she gets to Spain, the more elaborate the welcomes become, and Christina allows herself to believe that she's traveling toward happiness. But when she arrives in Castile in early 1258, Christina discovers that promises made to royal daughters are easily broken. Alfonso's wife, supposedly barren for years, has suddenly begun producing heirs. The king no longer needs to annul his marriage, which means Christina has traveled across Europe for nothing. She's stranded in a foreign country, speaking a foreign language, surrounded by people who see her as an expensive mistake. Alfonso's solution is to offer his brother Philip as a substitute groom. It's a humiliating compromise. Christina came expecting to be queen of one of Europe's great kingdoms, and instead finds herself relegated to marrying a younger son who was originally destined for the church. Philip had been Archbishop of Seville before renouncing his religious vows to marry her, which somehow makes the whole arrangement feel even more like an afterthought. Christina marries Philip on March 31, 1258, in a ceremony that probably feels more like a funeral to her. The princess who had dreamed of queenly power finds herself settled in Seville with a husband she didn't choose, in a climate that makes her ill, surrounded by courtiers who whisper about the Norwegian girl who wasn't quite good enough for their king. The heat of southern Spain oppresses Christina in ways that go beyond mere physical discomfort. She's homesick for the cool forests and fjords of Norway, for the familiar rhythms of court life in Bergen, for people who speak her language and understand her references. Depression settles over her like a heavy cloak, and her health begins to deteriorate.
Christina dies in 1262, just 4 years after her marriage, at only 28 years old. She and Philip have no children, which means her journey to Spain ultimately accomplishes nothing. No heirs to carry Norwegian blood into the Castilian royal line, no lasting political alliance, no legacy except the story of a princess who traveled too far from home in pursuit of promises that turned to dust. Our journey through tragedy now takes us to 18th century England, where Princess Charlotte Augusta of Wales enters the world on January 7, 1796, carrying the hopes of a nation on her tiny shoulders. Charlotte is born into a royal family that's fractured beyond repair. Her father, the future George IV, despises her mother, Caroline of Brunswick, with a passion that's shocking even by royal standards. Charlotte's childhood unfolds against the backdrop of her grandfather, King George III's increasing mental instability. The king who once lost America to revolution is now losing his grip on reality, experiencing episodes of mania and depression that terrify the court and create a constitutional crisis. Charlotte grows up knowing that her father will likely become regent, and that she herself stands second in line to the throne of the most powerful empire in the world. By 1813, Charlotte has become a symbol of hope for the British people, who see in her a fresh start after decades of war and political upheaval. She's 16, spirited, and represents the possibility of a monarchy that might actually care about its subjects. But this popularity only makes her father more determined to control her, and when he arranges her engagement to Prince William of Orange, Charlotte finds herself facing the prospect of exile in Holland. Charlotte's refusal to marry William represents one of the most dramatic acts of royal rebellion in British history. She breaks off the engagement, defying her father's wishes and accepting the consequences: dismissal of her household servants, financial restrictions, and banishment to a remote lodge in Windsor Forest. Love, when it finally comes, arrives in the form of Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, a kind and intelligent young man who sees Charlotte as a person rather than a political prize. Their marriage in 1816 represents everything Charlotte has dreamed of, a union based on mutual affection and respect. But on November 5, 1817, Charlotte's fairy tale becomes a nightmare. After 50 hours of agonizing labor, she gives birth to a stillborn son.
Hours later, she dies at 21, taking with her the direct line of succession to the British throne and the nation's hopes for the future. From Georgian England, we cross to revolutionary France, where Marie-Thérèse Charlotte is born December 19, 1778, at Versailles. The eldest child of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, she enters a world of impossible luxury that's already showing cracks in its gilded facade. The French Revolution destroys Marie-Thérèse's world completely. She watches her father die on the guillotine in January 1793 when she's 14, followed by her mother in October. When her younger brother dies in prison in 1795, Marie-Thérèse becomes the sole survivor of her immediate family. Released into Austrian exile in December 1795, Marie-Thérèse spends decades moving between countries, never truly finding a home. The Bourbon Restoration brings her back to France, but the July Revolution of 1830 forces her into exile again. For exactly 20 minutes in 1830, between royal abdications, she's technically Queen of France, a brief, bitter taste of the power that might have been hers. Our final story takes us to ancient Carthage, where Sophonisba is born around 225 BC into the prestigious Barcid family. Her father Hasdrubal is a Carthaginian general, and she grows up knowing that her beauty and noble birth make her valuable in the deadly game of Mediterranean politics during the Second Punic War. Initially promised to Massinissa of eastern Numidia, Sophonisba instead marries Syphax of western Numidia when Carthaginian strategy shifts. Her marriage secures a crucial military alliance, and for a moment it seems her diplomatic success might help Carthage defeat Rome. But Roman resilience gradually turns the tide. When Scipio Africanus defeats Syphax at Curta in 203 BC, Sophonisba faces capture. Rather than become a Roman prisoner, she marries Massinissa, her former fiancé, hoping for protection. But when the Romans demand her surrender, Massinissa offers her a choice: captivity or death. Sophonisba chooses death, drinking poison rather than submit to Roman authority. In that final moment, she becomes a symbol of Carthaginian defiance that will inspire poets and playwrights for centuries. These 5 women, Catherine, Christina, Charlotte, Marie-Thérèse, and Sophonisba, lived in different worlds but shared common experiences of privilege that became prison, expectations that became burdens, and dreams that turned to dust. Their crowns couldn't protect them from heartbreak, their wealth couldn't buy happiness, and their noble blood couldn't shield them from universal human experiences of loss and disappointment. Yet in their struggles, we see reflections of our own battles with life's challenges. Their stories remind us that beneath all the pageantry and politics, these were women who loved, grieved, hoped, and suffered just as we do. Their true nobility lay not in their birth circumstances, but in how they faced the difficulties that life brought them. In their courage, dignity, and refusal to be crushed by disappointment, these tragic princesses achieved a kind of immortality that no crown could provide.